Something strange is happening in Cleveland, and it all centers around one moment that everyone thinks they understand: Shedeur Sanders' NFL debut. On the surface, it looked like a disaster: a quiet stat line, a hostile defense, and instant online judgment from people who never played a snap. But the deeper you look, the more the entire picture starts to shift. Teammates are speaking up. Analysts who actually studied the film are exposing details completely missed in the highlight clips. And behind the scenes, the energy inside that stadium, the moment Sanders jogged out, tells a story louder than any box score. What really happened out there? And why are so many people suddenly changing their tone? The truth is far more revealing than anyone expected, and it's already reshaping his future in ways nobody saw coming. The instant reaction to Shedeur Sanders' debut spread across social media like wildfire. Clips of missed throws, screenshots of the box score, and a quarterback rating that looked brutal on paper became the entire story for people who only watched the highlights. Overnight, the narrative hardened. Sanders wasn't ready, he was overhyped, and the Browns had made a mistake by putting him on the field. It was the kind of loud, shallow judgment that goes viral because it's easy to repeat, not because it's accurate. But that surface-level reaction ignored everything that was happening around him. The game wasn't a...
Something strange is happening in Cleveland, and it all centers around one moment that everyone thinks they understand: Shedeur Sanders' NFL debut. On the surface, it looked like a disaster: a quiet stat line, a hostile defense, and instant online judgment from people who never played a snap. But the deeper you look, the more the entire picture starts to shift. Teammates are speaking up. Analysts who actually studied the film are exposing details completely missed in the highlight clips. And behind the scenes, the energy inside that stadium the moment Sanders jogged out tells a story louder than any box score. What really happened out there? And why are so many people suddenly changing their tone? The truth is far more revealing than anyone expected, and it's already reshaping his future in ways nobody saw coming. The instant reaction to Shedeur Sanders' debut spread across social media like wildfire. Clips of missed throws, screenshots of the box score, and a quarterback rating that looked brutal on paper became the entire story for people who only watched the highlights. Overnight, the narrative hardened. Sanders wasn't ready, he was overhyped, and the Browns had made a mistake by putting him on the field. It was the kind of loud, shallow judgment that goes viral because it's easy to repeat, not because it's accurate. But that surface-level reaction ignored everything that was happening around him. The game wasn't a clean showcase or a controlled situation designed for success. It was chaos, the kind of high-pressure environment that exposes even veteran quarterbacks. And as the dust settled, voices who actually understand the game began pushing back on the online noise. Players who were on the field with Sanders, analysts who broke down every snap, fans who felt a shift in the stadium the moment he stepped onto the turf. Together, they began painting a picture that looked nothing like the rushed narrative dominating the timeline. The truth is that Sanders' debut can't be judged by a single stat line or a few out-of-context plays. The circumstances were stacked against him in ways most viewers didn't realize, and the people closest to the situation are the ones now challenging the initial perception. And that shift started with a voice nobody expected. The first real crack in the social media narrative came from someone who actually mattered: Cedric Tillman, the Browns' starting wide receiver and one of the few people who shared the field with Shedeur Sanders that day. When reporters asked him what it was like playing with Sanders for the first time, his answer stunned everyone. He didn't dance around it or offer a vague cliché. He admitted straight up that the game itself was the first time they had ever played together. Not in practice, not in walkthroughs, not in a single rep during the week. Their first moments as a quarterback-receiver pairing came against one of the best defenses in the league, with the stakes high sky and no preparation behind them. Instead of criticizing the situation or calling out the coaching staff, Tillman focused on what he'd seen from Sanders behind the scenes. He talked about his competitive fire, the way he prepares every day, and the quiet professionalism he brings to practice despite not getting first-team reps. Tillman made it clear that Sanders wasn't just a rookie thrown into chaos, he was someone who had been putting in the work long before fans ever saw him take a snap. What made Tillman's comments so powerful wasn't the praise itself, but it was the genuine excitement in his voice when he talked about playing with Sanders again. He emphasized how valuable real practice time would be, how much timing and chemistry matter, and how different things could look once they finally get reps together. When a starting receiver publicly says he's looking forward to
building that connection, it speaks volumes about the confidence players inside the locker room already have in their young quarterback. And that kind of endorsement doesn't happen by accident. It usually means the team sees something the outside world hasn't caught on to yet. But the next person to speak up took things even further, and his breakdown changed the entire conversation. Once the film started circulating, the entire picture of Shedeur Sanders' debut began to shift. People who actually studied the tape saw details that never showed up on social media. The first and most important piece of context was the opponent. Sanders wasn't stepping in against a soft, confused defense. He was thrown into the fire against a fully healthy, fully motivated Baltimore unit that thrives on disguising coverages and overwhelming, inexperienced quarterbacks. They weren't easing up, and they weren't giving him time to settle. They were hunting. But that was only the beginning. The second piece of context, the one almost nobody mentioned, was that Sanders had 0 snaps with the first-team offense before the game. Not a handful, not a single practice period. 0. The entire game plan was built around Dillon Gabriel's tendencies, his reads, and his comfort zones. Every protection call, every timing route, every progression tree was designed for a completely different quarterback. Sanders had to operate a playbook tailored for someone else, in real time, against one of the best defenses in football. And then came the moment that made everything even harder. Just before halftime, the Browns lost their starting left tackle, the player responsible for protecting Sanders' blind side. Suddenly, he was stepping onto the field without the one person who could keep pressure from collapsing behind him. For a rookie making his debut, that's a nightmare scenario. You can't calmly work through progressions when you're bracing for a hit you can't see coming. Put all of this together, the elite defense, the lack of preparation, the compromised protection, and the film starts to look very different from the viral clips. The struggles weren't the result of some glaring flaw or lack of talent. They were the predictable outcome of a quarterback thrown into an impossible situation. And the people who broke down the tape saw flashes buried beneath the chaos that most viewers completely missed. What Sanders did next is what turned those flashes into something impossible to ignore. For most people, the only part of Shedeur Sanders' debut they paid attention to was the ugly box score. But anyone who actually watched the game, start to finish, noticed something different buried inside the chaos. It began quietly, with his very first snaps. Sanders came out and completed his first 2 throws, both delivered with calm footwork and clean mechanics. It wasn't flashy, but it showed he wasn't overwhelmed by the moment. He settled in, saw the field, and looked poised in a situation that rattles plenty of rookies. Then came the rough stretch. Baltimore adjusted, turned up the pressure, and unleashed the exotic looks they're known for. Most rookies crumble in that moment, especially when the chemistry with receivers isn't there. Sanders didn't. The numbers dipped, the hits came fast, and the pocket kept collapsing, but he never panicked. And that calm ended up setting the stage for the drive that changed everything. Down 23-6, with the stadium deflated and the clock slipping away, Sanders stepped back in with nothing left to lose. And suddenly the flashes became impossible to ignore. His 25-yard strike to Harold Fannin Jr. came out of nowhere, a laser that cut through coverage and hit the rookie perfectly
in stride. It was the kind of throw that makes coaches sit up in their chairs during film sessions. Even critics who had been loud all game went quiet after seeing that ball leave his hand. He followed it with a clutch 3rd-and-long completion to Jerry Jeudy, a player he had never practiced with. Jeudy fought for the first down like he wanted to be playing with Sanders. That chemistry shouldn't exist between two players who haven't shared reps, but it showed up anyway. It was raw, instinctual timing, the kind that hints at something bigger if they ever get real practice together. Then Sanders pulled out the mobility everyone keeps underestimating. He slipped through pressure, picked up yards with his legs, and kept the drive alive when most
In stride. It was the kind of throw that makes coaches sit up in their chairs during film sessions. Even critics who had been loud all game went quiet after seeing that ball leave his hand. He followed it with a clutch 3rd and long completion to Jerry Jeudy, a player he had never practiced with. Jeudy fought for the first down like he wanted to be playing with Sanders. That chemistry shouldn't exist between two players who haven't shared reps, but it showed up anyway. It was raw, instinctual timing, the kind that hints at something bigger if they ever get real practice together. Then Sanders pulled out the mobility everyone keeps underestimating. He slipped through pressure, picked up yards with his legs, and kept the drive alive when most rookies would have folded. That set up the 2 end zone throws people were so quick to criticize. But on the film, the story looked different. Sanders was throwing to guys he barely knew, under intense pressure, trying to force a chance at a miracle. And even then, one of those passes hit his receiver right in the hands. If that ball is secured, the entire narrative of his debut changes. Those moments, the deep strike, the clutch conversion, the off-script plays, the near touchdown, revealed something that stats never could. They showed talent, toughness, and a calm under pressure that you can't coach. The flashes were real, and they were bright enough to make people take a second look. And that final drive set up the moment that pulled back the curtain on just how much went wrong around him. Everything that had been working against Shedeur Sanders throughout the game came crashing together on one final snap. 4th and 5, season slipping away, a rookie quarterback fighting through pressure, unfamiliar receivers, and a playbook not designed for him, and then the Ravens jumped early. You could see it on the replay. The defender on the left side moved before the ball left the ground, collapsing Sanders' pocket before he even had a chance to plant his feet. Under normal circumstances, that's an automatic flag. 5 free yards, a fresh opportunity, momentum swinging at the perfect time. Instead, the whistle stayed silent, and Sanders was left to deal with the fallout. With the pocket imploding instantly and no time to process the field, he was forced into a desperation sidearm throw just to avoid a sack. The pass never had a real chance, and the drive, along with the comeback, ended right there. It wasn't a misread or a panicked mistake. It was a play broken from the start, doomed by a missed call he had no control over. And moments like that made the bigger picture impossible to ignore. Because when you step back and look at the entire night, the problems surrounding Sanders weren't isolated. They were systemic. No first-team practice reps for the backup quarterback all season. No adjustments to the game plan once he entered. No updated protection calls to support a rookie facing an elite defense. And no chemistry between Sanders and the receivers he was suddenly expected to rely on in the game's biggest moments. Even Jerry Jeudy, one of the team's top targets, wasn't on the field during the critical final sequence, leaving Sanders throwing to players he barely knew. These issues weren't created by the quarterback. They were signs of deeper organizational habits, the kind that show up when preparation falls behind reality. Instead of building a structure where the next man up is ready to go, the Browns were scrambling, and Sanders was the one handed the consequences. Analysts who reviewed the film kept pointing to the same theme. The situation around him cracked long before he ever stepped onto the field.
That's why the final sequence mattered so much. It wasn't just about a missed penalty or a broken play. It exposed everything the team had failed to prepare for, and it set the stage for a much larger conversation about how the Browns operate and what needs to change if they want Sanders to succeed. While the online chatter painted Shedeur Sanders as a lost cause, the atmosphere inside the stadium told a completely different story. The moment he jogged onto the field, the crowd exploded with a level of energy Cleveland hadn't shown in weeks. Fans who had been booing every stalled drive suddenly came alive. It wasn't quiet excitement, it was thunderous. You could feel the shift, like a fan base that had been begging for a spark finally got what it wanted. And that reaction wasn't just noise. It was a clear message about who they believe should be leading this offense. Inside the locker room, the sentiment looked just as different. Players like Cedric Tillman weren't simply offering polite support. They were openly backing Sanders and expressing real excitement about working with him once they actually get practice reps together. That kind of public backing from starters isn't normal. It means something. It means the players see potential, maybe even leadership, that fans and commentators haven't fully recognized yet. But the coaching staff's stance couldn't be more different. Kevin Stefanski has continued leaning toward Dillon Gabriel, doubling down on a direction that the fans, and now multiple players, are clearly questioning. This isn't just a minor disagreement. It's a widening gap between what the locker room feels, what the fan base wants, and what the coaching staff insists is the right move. And that gap is starting to create real pressure. The tension has reached a point where the front office can't ignore it. Jimmy Haslam has made bold decisions before, and he's never been afraid to push back against his own football staff when something feels off. Now he's watching a fan base rally around a young quarterback, players hint that change is needed, and analysts break down film that shows Sanders' potential in spite of terrible circumstances. It puts the organization in the spotlight they didn't expect, and one they can't step out of without making a real decision. This isn't just about choosing between two quarterbacks. It's about what kind of franchise the Browns want to be. One that listens, adapts, and recognizes talent when it's right in front of them, or one that doubles down on a plan everyone else sees as failing. And every sign points to that decision coming sooner rather than later. When you step back and look at everything that surrounded Shedeur Sanders' debut, the story becomes impossible to simplify. The numbers might suggest a disaster, but the context tells a completely different tale. One of a rookie thrown into a perfect storm of injuries, bad timing, and organizational missteps. And yet, even inside that chaos, he showed the flashes that separate placeholders from potential franchise cornerstones. The deep strike, the clutch third down throw, the calm under pressure, the competitive fire that teammates like Cedric Tillman see every single day. The truth is that Sanders wasn't given a fair runway. He wasn't prepared with first-team reps, he wasn't protected by a game plan built for him, and he wasn't surrounded by the stability young quarterbacks need to succeed. Judging him off that single night, without acknowledging the weight he was carrying, is not only unfair, it completely ignores the signs of what he could become with real support.
Now the decision lands on the organization. Do they keep forcing a plan that's already cracking, or do they finally give Sanders the preparation he deserves? Fans have made their stance clear. Players are speaking up. Analysts are pointing out the things the box score can't show. All that's left is for the people in charge to decide whether they're willing to adapt or whether pride will lead them down another frustrating path. Because if Sanders gets a real week of preparation, real chemistry, real reps, and a game plan designed around his strengths, the version of him we've seen in flashes might not stay hidden for long. And if that version emerges, this entire season could take a turn nobody expected. So as Cleveland waits for the next move, one thing has become impossible to deny. The narrative around Shedeur Sanders is changing fast. And if the Browns make the right decision, this rough debut might end up being the moment everything truly began.